The rise and fall of Apple. Apple has been ranked first on the Kantar BrandZ Most Valuable Global Brands 2022 list. This has been the case since 2015, with a 55% increase in brand value, putting it on track to become the first trillion-dollar brand. Apple is one of those companies that everyone has an opinion about. From the partisans to the critics, it's difficult to see what's going on with the growing tech giant. Though it is difficult to deny Apple's success as an innovative and profitable organization. However, it does have a few behind-the-scenes problems. Apple stands out for its high degree of differentiation and ongoing diversification, with a brand value of $947.1 billion. What comes to mind when you hear the words iPod, iPad, iPhone, and MacBook? Is it the world's second largest company? Is it your preferred method of communicating with friends or listening to music? One of the first things that comes to mind is almost certainly a very successful company. But things haven't always been this way. It's impossible to discuss Apple's success without mentioning the late, great Steve Jobs. His vision and leadership helped propel the company from $10 per share to over $400. This rise was made possible by the development of Apple Macs, iPod, and iPhones. Jobs led the team that delivered one great new piece of tech after another. The inventions were timely, disruptive, and well packaged, with a brand image that represented simplicity, value, and attitude. During his tenure at Apple, all seemed well. The momentum was building, investors were cashing in, and people were queuing around the block for every new product release. People were obsessed with everything Apple did, and it seemed they could do no wrong. Even after Jobs passed away, the company remained a market leader, and everyone was curious how they did it. It appeared that his legacy would live on under Tim Cook's leadership, but the success was only temporary. The downfall of Apple. Steve Jobs became involved in internal politics, was stripped of his duties and resigned in 1985. Following his claims that he would launch a new company, Apple filed a lawsuit. This would prevent him from using sensitive information about the company whilst competing. This was eventually settled out of court. With a computer that was $1,000 less expensive and twice as powerful as anything Apple had produced, Steve Jobs founded NEXT Inc., Next Inc. Using the NeXTSTEP operating system, the company created high-end computers at competitive prices. To focus on its operating system, Next sold its hardware division to Canon in 1993. It stayed ahead of the competition by ensuring that the operating system could run on cutting-edge hardware such as Intel x86 and Pentium processors. Microsoft's Windows 3.1 was a huge success, and its successor, Windows 95, became a major competitor to Mac OS. This is quite interesting, right? And not only that, Motorola and IBM began to develop PowerPCs, which were quickly adopted by software developers such as Adobe and Aldus. Apple created the PowerPC upgrade card, and the first Apple PowerMacs were released in 1994. Without Jobs and Wozniak, Scully was trusted to steer the company. Color was introduced to the Macs with a System 7 operating system, and the PowerBook laptop was also released. The Newton Message Pad, a glorified note-taker that cost $700, was one of the company's most visible failures. The recovery of Apple. By 1996, Apple had begun licensing Mac OS to Motorola and IBM, a move suggested by Jobs before he left the company. PowerPC processors entered their third generation, which looked promising for all parties involved. Apple then acquired Next to improve the Mac OS and stay ahead of the competition. In 1997, Steve Jobs delivered an inspirational speech on behalf of Apple. This would set the scene for the future of the Mac OS and other popular Apple products. Microsoft was so impressed that they invested $150 million in the company. When it was released, the Mac OS 8 was considered a huge success. Later that year, the Power Mac G3 was released and the first Apple Store was opened. Jobs was put back as CEO and remained so until his death. Microsoft agreed to continue developing Microsoft Office software for Mac OS, which could be a turning point for Apple. Microsoft even created a business unit dedicated to Apple software, greatly improving the end product. By 1998, the Apple iMac and the PowerBook G3 were extremely popular, and Apple's profits were enormous. Apple was a force to be reckoned with. The iMac further cemented Apple's market position, driven by a belief in aesthetics and design as well as functionality. Soon after, iBooks and the PowerBook G4s were available, as well as AirPort's wireless innovation. The Mac OS X 2001 was a huge leap forward for Apple's desktop operating system. Mac OS X included developments from FreeBSD and NextStep. The Unix Foundation appealed to the IT sector, while the improved GUI was well received by consumers and businesses alike. In addition, Apple began to open Apple retail stores in the United States to help offset poor sales in third-party stores. How did they succeed? I am very excited to talk about this. Well, the reason companies do well on the open market is that people believe in them. They see the profits and they expect more. They see what is and fantasize about what could be. They see the iPhone 4 and fantasize about the iPhone 5. People buy stocks because they expect a certain percentage of growth in the future. And when that growth does not materialize, they sell. It's a simple idea for a world with infinite variables. We'd do the same, right? For Apple, every home run in the last 12 years proved that the market was correct in its assumptions. They were market leaders, and their superior quality and brand evangelization enabled them to charge premiums for products that were not necessarily superior to the competition. Granted, the first generation products were usually remarkable and one of a kind, but subsequent iterations seemed to be much the same and met with little success. When another Apple innovation, the iPod, was released in 2001, the company began to grow. Its 5GB hard drive was marketed as storing 1,000 songs, an incredible feat for an MP3 player at this time. In addition, in 2003, Apple launched the iTunes Music Store. This followed the release of iTunes, Apple's digital music management software, 2 years prior. Apple released a version for Windows in 2003, and the rest of the world began to receive it in the following years. The iTunes Music Store was a simple way for residents of the United States to legally purchase music online. Its name was changed to iTunes Store in 2006 when it began to sell videos as well. In 2005, Apple computers integrated Intel chips, allowing them to run Windows. iMacs and MacBook Pros promise that all future Apple PC hardware will be Intel-based. The iPhone, which ran on iPhone OS, later iOS, was a hardware and software revolution in 2007. The iPhone combined basic phone functionality with the music and video libraries of the iPod. Since then, new iPhones with varying sizes and price tags have been released annually, including the redesigned 4, 4S, 5, and in 2013, 5S and 5C. The 6 Plus was released in 2014, and it was a larger model that paved the way for larger screen iPhones. The iPhone 6S in 2015 catered to those who still desired a small smartphone. But Apple quickly abandoned compact designs. Apple effectively omitted the 9th model by naming its 2018 the iPhone X. Siri, Apple's voice assistant, debuted in 2011 and has been a mainstay of all subsequent models. Regular iOS updates also added new features. In 2013, Apple introduced Touch ID, which allowed users to unlock their phones using their fingerprints. Face ID was introduced with the iPhone X in 2017, allowing users to unlock their phones and apps using facial recognition. In 2010, Apple introduced the iPad, a tablet with the best features of the iPhone, minus the ability to make phone calls, that was the size of a small laptop. Every year, new models of the iPhone are released. The iPad mini followed in 2012, with the larger iPad Pro following in 2015. When Steve Jobs died in 2011, many people predicted that Apple would fall again, having lost its visionary leader. So far, this has proven false, and Apple has remained successful. Nonetheless, some see the company's annual hardware updates as a sign of staleness. When the Apple Pencil was unveiled, many questions were raised. iPhones became thinner and larger. The lack of a headphone jack forces users to use wireless earphones. While the camera capabilities have improved, lenses remain the same size as in previous models. This means that newer devices, such as the iPhone 11 Pro, have unsightly blocks of cameras covering part of their backs. However, Apple's stock remains high. It's a market leader that has previously innovated in outstanding ways. So, do we hold Apple to an unrealistically high standard? Tim Cook took over from Steve Jobs as CEO in 2011, and Apple has grown to be worth more than $1 trillion. But the more important question is, how much is Apple worth to you? How much have you invested in the company's products? Do you have faith in them to protect your data and to continue to provide useful services? If this historical look has incited your interest in Apple, don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel. We'll be back with a new video soon.